Good evening. My name is Sue Hesselgesser, and I'm the Executive Director of your League of Women Voters right here in the Greater Dayton area. And we're, thank you. Come on. No. Anyway, we're very glad to have you here this evening for this really important discussion on three topics that will mean a lot, especially in the few weeks ahead leading up to a primary. There is a primary election. A lot of people don't realize that. So May 8th. But we're going to be talking tonight about your ballot, where to vote, when to vote. You know, do we have to worry about the Russians? You know, how does Montgomery fare as far as hacking goes? So for that, we'll have Jan Kelly, who's the director of Montgomery County Board of Elections. We're going to be talking about redistricting and gerrymandering and what that means and how it affects your elections. Christopher Devine, the assistant professor of political science, University of Dayton. We'll talk about that. And then issue one, which will be on your ballot, it's the Ohio Congressional Redistricting Reform. Tom Roberts, president of the Ohio Conference of Units of the NAACP and the second VP of the Dayton unit of the NAACP. So he will talk about that. You should all have cards in your lap. If you don't, you can raise your hand and a league member will bring it to you. And we will take questions from the audience after each section, okay? So at this time, I'm going to bring up one of the business ladies I know, Jan Kelly, the director of Montgomery County Board of Elections.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, and welcome to everyone. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate being able to speak tonight. But I kind of didn't appreciate the Dayton Daily News' headliner, which said, you can't. Now, can you hear me? No? Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Yeah, I'm kind of short for this. I need a little step stool. Hi, I'm Jan Kelly, the director at Montgomery County Board of Elections, and I want to thank Susan Hesselgesser, I've spelled that many times at the Board of Elections, for having me here tonight. And but I wanted to not thank the Dayton Daily News for the headline in their paper last week announcing this forum, saying that this is the Russians are program focused on protecting your vote. The Russians are coming. Is your vote safe? I think this is what election officials are trying to tackle all across the country, and specifically in Ohio with fake news. Your election is safe in the state of Ohio. We're not the Twitter police as election officials, so we do not like headlines like that, which really don't tell the whole story. Say again? Well, I don't know if you did that or the Dayton Daily News. Oh, okay. And maybe it's something to get people's attention or to attract attention. But what it does is it causes misunderstanding, and it really creates confusion, if not misinformation. Is there any way I can lower this a little bit?
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Great.
I was thinking you could just take the mic off.
Or if I can get, I don't
Hello.
have PowerPoint, so can I remove that? Yeah.
Remove, what do you want to remove?
This.
Oh, you just don't need it.
All right. Sissy? That? No. Yeah.
Does this work? This is working. You can just clip it to your...
Thank you. Yeah, I think that'll work better. Better? Okay, great. Misinformation, rumors, and fake news are only alarming people. As election officials, we are not the Twitter police, as I said before, but we are the responsible parties for the security of our voting systems. There has been no breach in Ohio's voting systems. I have confidence in our voting system, and I'd like to talk to you about some of the things that we do at the Board of Elections and throughout the state of Ohio to make sure that that doesn't happen. Elections are best administered by local officials. about a year and a half ago, I'm sure you heard through the news, and this was not fake news, true news, that Homeland Security wanted to take over elections. The Secretary of State was vociferous, as were members of the Ohio Elections Association, in not making that happen. We didn't feel that Homeland Security could effectively administer elections in the state of Ohio. They have a tough enough job administering traffic security at airports, let alone trying to secure elections throughout the 88 counties in Ohio and throughout the United States. But there is now some talk recently in the news, I don't know if you've seen this, but with the reauthorization of the Homeland Security bill, there is talk of having Secret Service agents at each of the polling locations now. There was a letter that was sent to the senators in the United States Senate opposing that measure. First of all, the state of Ohio has a law that says no uniformed police officers are allowed to be at polling locations, and that's to help with intimidation. You don't want somebody there that you feel intimidated by, unless we call the sheriff's office, which we've had to do on a few occasions, but no uniformed police officer should be at a polling location. But the two-party system in Ohio is unique. We have a Republican and a Democrat at the Board of Elections for each of our positions. We have 26 full-time employees, and how it works is we have the Secretary of State. Now, each of the boards, and there's 88 boards, have a Republican and a Democrat director and deputy director. The board of Elections is made up of 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And then underneath that come the Republican director or deputy director, and then a Democrat director or deputy director. Each of the Republican and the directors, each of the Republicans and the Democrats each have a key to the secure locations within the Board of Elections. Actually, I do have my keys with me tonight. Red, I have a lot of keys, so I kind of mark them with colors. Red is for Republican. I keep that key with me, especially all during election times, and all of our keys are accounting for in a key log system for certain employees only that have them. So in the morning, I have to open the IT room downstairs along with my Democrat counterpart, Steve Horstman, and or the other people in the office who are a Republican and a Democrat to even get into the IT room. And then we have a BIOS and another logarithm that we log into our administrative GEMS server database so that we can access that. No one else can access that. So there's always somebody looking over your shoulder in a good way to make sure that the system stays honest. And this occurs throughout all 88 counties in the state of Ohio. Now, does that correct everything? Absolutely not. There's a lot of other measures that we take, and I'll share some of them with you tonight, but of course I won't share everything because then that would make it secure. One of the main things is that none of Ohio's voting equipment is connected to the internet. It's all freestanding. None of our electronic poll books, if you've gone to the polls, are connected to, they're connected to each other, and that's only so the electronic poll books can talk to each other to know if you've already checked in and voted, but none of them are connected to any central database so that the electronic poll books can't call back to our office and tell us how many people have voted today, or if some electronic poll books have gone down, or if there's trouble with the signature. Sometimes, like Kroger, some of those signatures look a little fuzzy. We have to get direct information from the polling location supervisors via telephone, the old-fashioned way, with a landline usually, because oftentimes they don't have good reception in the basements of churches or schools, et cetera. Secretary of State Husted has made it clear that there has been no rigging of elections in the state of Ohio. I was a precursor to his big show on CBS this morning in the northern part of the county last November's election, and talking about the freestanding DREs that we have. DREs are direct recording equipment devices, and that's what Montgomery County uses. And that's what we're going to be looking at for purchasing new equipment. I don't know how many of you heard about us purchasing new equipment. Okay, we're hopefully looking at purchasing direct recording equipment again. There is some talk about paper ballots. It depends on what Senator LaRose has a bill on the floor for an appropriations bill for about $114 million right now that's going through. Hopefully we'll get it passed for the monies and then be able to decide from there with negotiations with some of the vendors and whether or not the vendors get the proper certification to meet the standards necessary for security, for efficiencies, et cetera, for us to purchase those machines. But what we're looking at right now, what we're using right now, are machines that were made probably in about 2003. I was at the Board of Elections in 2005 when they first implemented the direct recording devices. So the equipment that we're using is kind of like an old BlackBerry. We've been able to recycle them. We had some extra machines, so if something breaks down, we can pirate pieces from the old machines that we keep behind the auditorium, but we're about out of those pieces now. One of the things that was added to those machines as a last-minute deal with the legislature was the verifiable paper audit trail. And it's a piece of equipment on the side of the voting machines, and it was kind of made at the last minute, so it's not the best piece of equipment, and that breaks all the time. But the good thing is you have another piece of verifiable information as to how you voted. Now, you don't get to take that with you, but it is a record for us, and we have to keep that to verify how your vote was recorded at the polling location. And we have used that in what the League of Women Voters has lobbied for many years, which is our audits and post-election reviews and our recounts in the state of Ohio. And that also makes systems less likely for security breaches as compared to other systems used throughout the United States. The process to get a piece of equipment approved by the EAC, the Elections Assistance Commission, is about 2 years. So it's a lengthy process that the vendors have to go through. So we've been going through the process of reviewing that equipment right now and are looking at probably about June or July to really seriously sit down and look at some of this equipment again and make some decisions, and hopefully we'll be implementing it. We always implement new equipment or new major processes in an off-year election so that when we get to a big election like a presidential or a gubernatorial, we're ready to go without any flaws. It's going to be a big change for us since we've been using the same system for almost 15 years. Upholding and perpetuating the security of our county's election process is a continuing mission at the Board of Elections. We strive for improvement and 100% accuracy in everything we do. The policy of our security includes, but is not limited to, building security. We just went through a $1.3 million rehab of our entire building. We have cameras on every floor and in every office. We have new keys, ID badges, and more site security. We have passwords, secure badges for entry and exit, and to get into every system at the Board of Elections. We have voting system security. We have logistics and accuracy testing. And what logistics and accuracy testing is we have 2,800 voting machines that we have to deploy on Election Day, and we're getting ready to do that now. And that's for 176 locations in 360 precincts throughout the county. So we set up all those voting machines downstairs in our warehouse, and every single machine has to be checked with the ballot style that's going to be on that machine for that election. So every single style, and they are now on the website as of today as to what your sample ballot will look like for this election, has to be tested on the machines and on the what they call a PCMIA memory card. So could that be hacked? No. There are cards that we put in there. There's an authentication code that has to go in there before you can even access the database, and that goes through nothing. It's not an internet-based PC. It's not an internet-based card. It's just a freestanding card that we insert with the PDF of the ballot selection on there, and that whole logistics and accuracy test has to go through every time we have an election. Let's see. If anybody has any questions, you can jump in because I have a lot of information I can share with you. Sure.
I'm just curious about how the office
officers of the election office, how are they selected and what are their required backgrounds?
Like the board, you mean the board, how are they required? Sure. The question was, how are the board members, or me, you mean how am I chosen, or?
There was a director, that was Republican, and a
Director, okay.
that was an assistant.
So the Secretary of State, let's start there, he's elected or she's elected, and then there is a board. And the board is appointed by the party chairs. So our board is appointed by Mark Owens for the two Democrats, and then Phil Plummer appoints the two Republicans. He's the Republican Party chairman.
Was the chairman?
So it's the chairman's discretion, and then whoever the chairman has influencing him or her. You know, so it's kind of like, it's the party. The parties are very controlling in the state of Ohio, and that happens throughout all the 88 counties. And then the parties pick the director and the deputy director. And then the rest of the staff is also selected, and they serve at the pleasure of the parties.
Why is it so partisan? Why can't we have professional people as opposed to political people on the Board of Elections?
Because that's the law, that's the way it's been, and if you want to work in politics and you want to work with the Board of Elections, you better be political. But also, I have to say that on our side of the aisle and the Democrat side, I'm a Republican, but on both sides of the aisle, we have definitely increased the requirements to work with the Board of Elections. So like I always say, it's not your grandmother's election. You can't just throw people in there that can't get a job anywhere else, like it used to be years ago. And it's a political patronage job. You have to have you have to have many qualifications and adhere to the policies and procedures and ethical requirements that are necessary to conduct fair, accurate, and good elections, or you won't be there. Okay, thank you. How or when are absentee ballots counted? Great question. Absentee ballots are all counted if they're countable. And the first ones that are counted are on election night at 7:35 p.m. They're all downloaded, and they're the first ones reported to the Secretary of State's office. And then we report them every 15 minutes to our website. Now, the reporting to the Secretary of State's website, is that on the internet? There's a directed cable wire that's run from our office to his office, so it's not on the internet. And the Secretary of State's office sends us flash drives that we have to throw out each election. So every time we download something, we use a separate a separate flash drive to download the information, and then that's gotten rid of. So there's never duplication of that, and then it's downloaded to our website. Okay. Can voter registration rolls be accessed via the internet and possibly be manipulated? Good question. Tomorrow we have a board meeting. Susan will be there. There's a group, I think, are you part of that group that's asking for access to the voter registration database? Okay, there is a group or groups of people that want access to our voter registration database, and that's not going to happen because the statewide voter registration database is controlled by the 88 boards of elections, and we have to maintain the integrity of that database. A couple groups want to get together and access our database for registration so that they can track people that they're registering and get some data from it, but at this point we are not going to do that. We can download the information that we do have on the voter registration database, and that's available to the public right now, so they can plan, precinct walks, political strategies, campaigns. You work with students that are in political science majors and do exit polling, et cetera, so that information is available anytime. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I have seen concerns raised that even if voting machines are not connected to the internet, that if they have the capability to connect to the internet, they may be able to be accessed remotely. Have you looked into this issue in your machines? No, we have not, because we would never consider connecting them to the internet because it's not allowed under state law. Okay, sure. One, how many different voting machines are used in Ohio? I think there's four different styles. AccuVote, optical scan, a DRE with an optical scan, and then all paper. 2, what happens to your vote after the polls close and the machines are turned in to the Board of Elections? Wow, that's a busy night. Here's what happens. It's like controlled chaos. It's really fun, though, if you're into this kind of thing. All 2,800 memory cards come down to the Board of Elections, and we finally get all 2,800 back on that night. You know, oftentimes through the years, we haven't gotten them back, so we have to send people out to polling locations to retrieve the memory card that might still be out there, or we have to bring all the machines back, or we've had to wake people up. They may have taken the memory card with them, not understood. Anyway, so we get all those memory cards back. We load them into our GEMS server. We can only download 20 at a time because of the limited capacity of our server. So that's why it takes a long time to get the results. Everybody wants them. You know, everything's quick now. You can get results for anything, but not with this system. You can only get results when you can get them. And we load them as fast as we can, but usually we don't get everything in until about 12:30, and then the Secretary of State has to get everything in, and we have to wait and be released from by the Secretary of State's office at the Board of Elections by a phone call. And sometimes that'll be 4 o'clock in the morning until we're released, until they have all the data that they need. And we do that. I mean, that's part of our job, so no biggie there. Let's see. What computer is used to tabulate the votes in the county board and the whole state? That's called our GEMS server, and that's part of our voting system. It's dedicated just to our voting system. And our budget is $3.8 million per year.
There's something on the back of that.
Okay. And does not include new machines. Our budget doesn't include new machines. However, last year we've been giving back about $550,000 per year back to Montgomery County, and have been able not to let them take it from the general fund, not to let them put it back in the general fund, which is amazing. They've put it in a special fund for us for machine allocation, because we have a good relationship with our Office of Management and Budget, and have been able to secure that money in a special fund because we knew this was coming. A lot of counties throughout the state knew this was coming. Now they're only going to get a portion of the monies from the state, which they also know, but the county commissioners are now saying, we don't have any money, we can't help you, we don't know what we're going to do. So some of the counties are in bad straits, but we think we're going to be in good shape, and we'll make the best decision we can given the amount of dollars that we have with the county and with the taxpayers' money.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This one's a little complicated. Take a moment, read it.
Is the key system Republican and Democrat each having a key to IT? What keeps anyone from getting a copy of those keys? Oh, because I'm the key keeper. And each of them are numbered, and there's a login and a logout system for them. And we just switched the doors, so it used to be the Republican keys were on the bottom, so I always had to bend down. Now they're on the top, so I don't have to. It's kind of a joke in our office. And then inventory of voting equipment. Like, what if somebody grabbed a machine, was able to get a memory card and take it out of the office and put it back in the flow of things? Like, how does that happen? Well, we keep an inventory of all of our machines. We have a scanning system. When all the machines come back in, we scan them. We know where they're located. We have to account for every single machine that's in our warehouse. We know where it's at. We inventory everything. We have a chain of custody. We have a repair log. We have machine identification codes, so we know where all the machines are. And we have a secure and proper storage of all of our ballots and election data at the Board of Elections. We have ballot on demand paper stock that we keep under lock and key. For example, right now, everything is under lock and key because we're what we call live, because our ballots are live. We're locking down tomorrow after the board meets. We have to lock down a little bit later this year because the city of Dayton, Joey Mims resigned as Dayton City Commissioner to take another position. So the city of Dayton has a charter that allows for their races to be determined 60 days out from an election. All the other cities and municipalities have a 90 days, which I'd really like the city commissioners in the city of Dayton to change that, because it really puts us behind the 8 ball with elections, because we're always kind of up to the wire on that, because it just puts us back. Let's see. Okay. What or who determines names should be removed from voter register? Word was out to check to make sure your name was still in the register. Oh, this is a good question. There's a lawsuit, Apri versus Husted, that was just argued in the Supreme Court a few months ago. We haven't heard the result of it yet, but this is the one where we have to clean up our voter registration rolls, just like you clean up your hard drive at home or clean out your makeup drawer, whatever it is. But there's been lawsuits like don't take people off the rolls that haven't voted because it's not fair, or you should be taking people off the rolls that haven't voted in the past 2 federal elections, which is currently the law. So that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. We don't know what the outcome will be of that. So we have not removed anybody from the voter rolls like we usually have done, and it was simply to clean up. People move a lot. We're a very mobile society now, so we had a lot of people on the rolls in the state of Ohio, or specifically in Montgomery County, that hadn't been here for years, hadn't voted in an election, and were removed pursuant to Ohio law. So that is still up in the air as to what we're supposed to do with those voters. Right now, we are in limbo. We haven't done anything with them. They're still on the rolls. Okay. You're sure to have a lot of confidence in your election. You seem to have a lot of confidence in your election operation. Great. So what keeps you up at night? My husband's snoring if I don't go to sleep first. What needs the attention of our legislative leaders? Okay. So no, not much keeps me up at night. I don't know. Just don't worry that much about things anymore. What needs the attention of our legislators? Kind of undo some laws. You know, that's always my mantra. If I ever ran for office, I'd run on the platform of undo some laws. I think there's too many laws. And keep up to date with technology. There's so many things on the books right now that are so outdated because of technology. I'd like the legislature to look at those. They try the best they can because they've got so many areas and avenues to cover. It's hard for them to. They've got a lot on their plate. And right now, I'd just like them to look at the appropriation for new machines and to definitely keep security, cybersecurity, and everything that people are concerned about in check to make our country to continue to prosper. And I just kind of stopped and looked at the pond when I came in, and I just thought of on Walden's Pond and what a great country this is. And people have been influenced by various things throughout our country's history. George Washington, when he was running against Adams, appeared at the Continental Congress in his military uniform. Nobody ever did that, but that got the question raised to everybody, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Well, he's George Washington, and that's what he wanted people to know because he was running for office. So, we're a great country. Let's keep that in mind and know that at Montgomery County Board of Elections, we are here to serve you, to make voting as easy as possible for you, as hard as possible for anybody to cheat. And if you ever have any questions, please feel free to give me a call because we are here to serve the voters, the taxpayers, and do the best we can. So thank you for your attention. If any more questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
There is just one
Yep.
more that I think we have time for.
I would like to volunteer to work. Oh my gosh, I love you. Work at the polls. I'm an independent. Okay, so that means you're an issue only, and let me address that. That's a good point. This is a primary election, so in the state of Ohio, you don't register as a Republican or a Democrat like you do in Florida, where I came from. You affiliate, and what that means is when you go to the polls during the primary, somebody will say, what kind of ballot do you want? And you'll say, well, that's really none of your business. Well, if you want to vote, it is. So you'll request a Republican. Not that that was on my mind. You'll request a Republican, a Democrat, or an issues only, or a Green Party ballot this time. But you have to tell them what type of ballot style you want so you get the right ballot, so you can vote for the right person in your party. So you're an independent. We can probably check your affiliation and see if you're really an independent. You might be an independent thinker, but you may be affiliated with a party. Yes?
That is my question.
Okay.
To work the polls, there has to be an even number of Democrats.
Right.
And some Republicans. So if I want to volunteer at the polls.
Right.
I have to.
Declare.
What I'm saying to you.
Right.
Why is that necessary? Why does it have to be the volunteers are needed, what,
It's the law.
well, granted, okay, but what's the thinking, I guess, behind that? What could be done to change that?
Well, that's a two-party system we're talking about. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, the board set up, the director, the deputy director.
Given status quo, I'm wondering what, so,
What could you do to change it? That's a legislative change. You'd have to lobby your local elected officials.
She could volunteer for the league.
Oh, there we go. You can volunteer for other entities. They've got you signed up for the league, okay? Or you could do some exit polling up here at the University of Dayton.
so there's no chance of ever getting, I know other independents who feel the same way.
Right.
There's other parties besides the two-party system also.
Exactly, but the state of Ohio doesn't recognize those. Doesn't recognize independents as a party in the state of Ohio. And there's ways to get it recognized.
Great question. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Jan.
Okay, sure. Okay, great, thanks. If that was okay. Good. And we are looking for precinct election official workers. They're not called poll workers anymore. So if you're interested, please contact our office and we'll direct you to the appropriate coordinator. It pays a whopping $15 for 13 hours of service, but we really do need people to help us out. So please, if you know anybody or you have kids or you want to work, let us know.
I don't think I plugged that in right. Thank you, Jan Kelly. I told you, she is one of the hardest working women I have ever met. And I really appreciate her. I get to go to the Board of Elections meetings. Get to go is fun because it's early in the morning. But I have to tell you, I have so much confidence in our Montgomery County Board of Elections. If you could see the way they go through, you know, those absentee ballots that you fill in and you check or X instead of filling in the bubble, and they don't go through the scanners, you'd be amazed how closely the Republicans and Democrats work together to make sure those ballots get counted, because they have to rewrite them. When you do that kind of stuff, they have to be rewritten. And they take great pains to get it right. And then the board has to look at each one to make sure the Democrat and Republican people did it correctly. So please feel confident. And it was a little joke, Dan. I'm sorry if it wasn't funny for you. It was, are the Russians coming? ? Like, the Russians are coming. Really? But if you didn't take it that way, I know you're sensitive. But anyway. I know, but she did just ask for a Russian ballot, so you know it's on her mind. Anyway, the next thing we're going to talk about is redistricting and gerrymandering and how it affects the elections. And for that, we have Christopher Devine. He's a PhD, but he said we could call him Chris. Right.
What's this? Come on. There, you're good.
I think that's good. All right. Let's see if I have in the right spot. Is that? No?
Be a little higher.
Maybe
Wait until you're top.
here. Trying the tie. That could be a little funny looking.
It should turn.
Oh, no. Oh, I think that's good. Good? Okay. All right. And am I shooting for 15 minutes here?
Half an hour.
Oh, half an hour? Okay. Oh, even better. I'm notorious in the classroom for using all my time and then some, so I could easily go more than 15 minutes. Let me get the computer set up, though. It's the other technological issue. Really appreciate being here tonight, and I thank the League of Women Voters for setting this up and for inviting me to participate. I appreciate that. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this and for inviting me and for putting me on such a great panel. I'm learning a lot, and I'm sure we'll learn more. Fortunately, Senator Roberts here has the tough task of explaining issue 1 probably better than I can. I was relieved when I heard he'd be taking over that part. So let me just put some things in context before I get started here. First of all, I want to say that when it comes to issue 1, frankly, I support issue 1, but that's really not why I'm here. I don't see myself in an advocacy position. I see myself in the professor's role that I'm trying to bring in the classroom every day. My basic function, my goal, is to set out some foundational information, present arguments on both sides, and let smart people decide how they want to come out on it. So that's what I'm going to try and do tonight. So I will give perspective on both sides of this. And I also want to aim for something a little broader than some of the other topics. We have very concrete, helpful information here. I'm going to, I don't know, I guess go a little higher in the clouds than that. I want to just think about some broader issues that relate to this whole discussion over issue 1, being redistricting and gerrymandering in particular. But also I want you to be thinking about a couple of things. First of all, what problems are we trying to fix? If we're focusing on redistricting, specifically for Congress, what's wrong with Congress that we need to fix? I thought that might get some laughs. I'm not even going to try to create a list. That's where I need a chalkboard to write down the list, right? So what are the problems with Congress that we're trying to fix? And is issue 1 going to fix those things? I'll put some more meat on the bones for that in a little bit here. So let's get started thinking about redistricting. And I just want to do kind of a quick overview of what we're talking about with this. Of course, here we have the current congressional map for the state of Ohio, 16 districts. Talk a little more about what we're seeing here in a moment. But when it comes to redistricting, just definitionally speaking, we're talking about redrawing the boundaries of congressional districts. By the way, make sure you're separating this from the state legislative districts. We already had redistricting reform for that in, what was it, 2015? So now we're talking about congressional districts specifically. So what are the boundary lines for any given district? We can certainly see, for instance, in our case, really one of the cleanest set of boundary lines. We have Montgomery County, Greene County, half of Fayette County. You know, more logical than some other things you might see up there, right? So when do we do this? After the census, which is mandated by the Constitution. Every 10 years we do a census. Just happens to be on the, on the 0 years, right? 2010, 2020. So of course we have the census coming up in a couple of years. The Trump administration is gearing up for that to get that rolling out again. So why would that lead to redistricting? Well, a couple reasons that would lead to redistricting. It's not absolutely necessary after every census, but it almost always is for a couple of reasons. One being the potential for reapportionment. There are 435 U.S. House seats to go around. That's been the law for over 100 years, since 1911. They've stopped the growth on House seats. And so now what happens is, as I like to tell my students to think about it, we redistribute the portion of seats per state, reapportionment, right? So Ohio, of course, used to have many more than this. We lost 2 after the last census, tied with, was it New York, I think, the only 2 states to lose 2 seats. We're probably going to lose 1 seat, unfortunately, after the 2020 census. We'll see exactly what happens. So necessarily, we need to redraw the district boundary lines. We're going from 16 probably to 15. That's the first reason. The second one is because of Supreme Court rulings on this, 1962, Baker versus Carr, the Westbury decision in 1964, ruled that congressional districts have to be proportional by population. You can't have like rural areas with very few voters having as much voting power as some major city, Cincinnati or Dayton or Columbus or something like that. So if the population has shifted, then the boundary lines might need to shift. As you can imagine, a lot of people moving towards the Columbus area, perhaps moving out of the Cleveland area or some other parts of the state. So we might need to redistribute the population. Now, when it comes to deciding how the district lines are going to be redrawn, basically the states decide. This is basically, I'll get to the caveat there, a states' rights issue, if you will. States can draw their own district lines. This is a constitutional matter from Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution. It says, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. So states get to draw those district boundary lines. Now, in the state of Ohio, the system we have right now is that the state legislature passes a new redistricting plan, and the governor has the opportunity to sign off on that or to veto it. Now, I said that the states basically get to decide, but there are some restrictions. one of these is a state law matter, and you see this reflected in the district lines we see here in Ohio, that the districts would have to be contiguous. That is, you can't have big jumps in territory between parts of a district. See an example of that here in a moment. The other, what I was referring to here, they have to be roughly proportional by population. And the last one here is that they have to be non-discriminatory. Now, let me show you an example that will get to a couple of these things. I'm going to click out of here and get to Google Chrome, which handles this better from my experience here. Okay, so check out this district. I know you're not going to be able to see all this really carefully, but I'll work my way through. So this is up by the Cleveland area, and we have a big chunk of the Cleveland area. We have Akron down here, and we have these narrow corridors as little as 1,700 feet connecting them. Now, isn't this just ridiculous? This is an abuse of power, that kind of thing. Actually, this is a majority-minority district. So that's one reason. If you ask, why do we have gerrymandering? Why don't we just have, basically a grid across the state? Well, first of all, population isn't perfectly distributed at special points within the state. It's, wherever the people are going. So that's one reason why we don't have these very neat lines necessarily. But another is that pursuant to the Voting Rights Act 1965, we have to ensure that district lines are not set up in such a way as to disadvantage certain groups of people, in particular in that case, African Americans and Hispanics. Those are the special kind of allowances for majority-minority districts that have been set up and ruled as constitutional by the Supreme Court. So in this case, we have a lot of African Americans up in the Cleveland area and in the Akron area. Since we have to have contiguous districts, that's why this looks, absurd, but it actually makes sense when you think of it that way. It's not, the goal isn't to be absurd, the goal is to achieve that objective, because often these districts are the primary way that African Americans or Hispanics get elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Of course, the Senate, which has many fewer African Americans and Hispanics, does not have redistricting. So we see the effects there. In fact, that's one thing I want to point to here in a moment. I guess that actually satisfies it. Get back on track here. Okay, there we go. So, that helps to explain what we see here. But we also see some things that, not for the same purpose. So there we go with that district I was just describing up there. But then we have ones like this one here, part of Mercer County, snaking all the way up here by the lake. That's ridiculous. This one is not a very compact district, but you can make a better argument that there's at least some commonality between folks who live here because we have basically an Appalachian congressional district. So, it varies. It's hard to just say categorically that all gerrymandering or strange drawing of district lines is somehow invalid. Sometimes it's done for good reasons, or it looks more sensible when you check out the population characteristics. And then sometimes it really just is ridiculous. So here's some famously bizarre district lines. Actually, I think some of these majority-minority districts. I believe that one over there, for instance. This one is from Pennsylvania, the congressional map that just got ruled unconstitutional. And they're now, of course, that whole process. They're drawing new district lines. That's commonly referred to as Goofy kicking Donald Duck. It really does look like it, doesn't it? So this is what we're talking about with gerrymandering. It's not just drawing strange lines, but it's doing it for a politically interested purpose. In this case, typically, the way that it's done is to try to ensure that the party in control of the process helps to maximize the number of their folks who get elected or reelected, and oftentimes it's to protect incumbents more generally. Now, how do they do this? You ever wonder about that? How do you know if you draw the district line here versus there, you're going to advantage your party? Well, you can look at a bunch of information, including past voting in that area. But people move around, so that, what do you rely on then? You can use socio-demographic characteristics, economics, race and ethnicity, age, various characteristics like that to predict. You don't know, but to predict how people are going to vote. You could even use consumer information that's widely available, and believe me, the parties do that. They have incredibly sophisticated ways of figuring out how they can maximize the vote that they're going to get out of that area in such a way, just by a kind of a silly example, but if this was your territory you're working with, you draw the lines this way, you get 5 blue, let's say Democratic districts, and 0 red. But if you draw it just by this way instead, now we have advantage for Team Red, probably the Republicans here. The goal, gerrymandering is often misunderstood as the goal being to elect all people of your party and shut out the other party. Well, realistically, that's probably not going to happen. Usually what parties are trying to do is actually concentrate the other party within a district. I mean, if your opponents are going to win the district with 55% of the vote, what do you care if they win it with 90% of the vote? If you can, pack more of their voters into a certain other district where they're already going to win the majority, then you take them out of the other districts and you make it more competitive for your party. That's often the goal, and sometimes I think people misunderstand that. Now, to the larger point here, the really important thing that I want to address. I mean, I think a lot of you you're a pretty sharp crowd. I think you're all aware of what redistricting and what gerrymandering are. But I want to talk a little more about why this is important. Why would this even be targeted by the state government? In other words, why should I care about this? Think of it this way. Here are the re-election rates for the U.S. House over time. Now, this is for people who run for re-election, so you could argue it's distorted. Some people are choosing not to run. 2016, this was drain the swamp year, anti-establishment, all that, right? We re-elected 97% of the folks who ran for the House. Why? Because my Congress member is great. It's the rest of the country that has bad members of Congress, That's how it often works. And so if everybody thinks that way, then pretty much everybody re-elects their member of Congress. Well, it's so ironic, and you were laughing before about what's wrong with Congress. People tend to think there's a lot wrong with Congress. They've bounced all the way back up to 20% approval ratings in recent times. They're really riding high these days. We've seen in recent times, 10%, 15% of people approving of Congress. There are all kind of complex reasons for that. I think some of that, frankly, is unfair to Congress. Don't laugh at me, but I think there are some things where, it's hard to know exactly what people are judging there. But anyway, Congress is unpopular. Here's the paradox. Congress is unpopular, and yet they almost all get reelected.
Right.
How does this work? Well, of course, part of the explanation, at least one that people propose, is that this is essentially about gerrymandering. If you intentionally draw the district lines to help people get reelected, then they just have to satisfy that kind of polarized electorate within their district in order to win. And so the outcome you get is not only incumbents being reelected most of the time, but you also get polarization. And that's really where this becomes important. This is how it affects, not just like we're upset that politicians seem to game the process, and I mean that might just bother you in and of itself. But what's the outcome? A lot of people blame this for the polarization we see. This is one way of representing it. So here you have on a couple different dimensions, more of an economic dimension, left to right, social dimension, social/racial, if you will, left to right, plotted this way. This is for the current Congress. This is using a popular political science measure called DW Nominate. And in this case, we see this is polarization. There's really no middle. And if you look at how that's changed over time, this is one different way of representing it. So you look at times in the past. I'll caution, we have a tendency to romanticize the past too much. There are all kinds of problems we could discuss in these time periods, but at least there seemed to be more productivity from Congress because you had some Republicans who were overlapping on the left. Some Democrats were overlapping on the right, and you saw it here, and you saw it here, and then you look in recent times, and there's literally no middle. There's just a divide between them. What's the logic for this? How does this relate to redistricting and gerrymandering? Well, I'm sure you know this well, but I'll just say it anyway. Think about it. If you are, not to pick on anyone, but let's just say Mike Turner, for instance, in this congressional district, you're usually not too worried about a Democrat beating you. If, as I said, actually we don't have a particularly gerrymandered district. Well, I'll just go with this example. You're not particularly worried about a Democrat beating you. You're more worried if you've been drawn into a Republican district that you're actually going to lose in a primary. So your incentive is to run towards the extremes rather than to run toward the middle. If this were just a representative system, the district lines were drawn just in any reasonable, sensible way, then it should be pretty representative of the population. Most people are more towards the middle. You'd probably get more moderates elected. Well, if the fear is because you're in a safe district, you feel the ideological extremes of your party. For Mike Turner, it's the conservative wing of the party. For a Democrat, it would be the liberal wing of the party. Then you're going to push towards the pole and get exactly what we see here. For that matter, the moderates who do run, people get on, why can't politicians be moderate? There are some who try to be, and then they lose in primaries. I mean, that happens. So some of it's on voters, too. Sorry, it's not all politicians. As you get that ideological extremity, though, people are separated, you lose the ability to compromise, or the willingness to compromise, if you will. So you either get bad policy that's just for catering to one side of the political divide, or you get no policy at all. You get an unproductive Congress. And then you end up with this widespread feeling that Congress is dysfunctional, and we all hate it, and yet we reelect our members. You know, this is the cycle that with redistricting reform people are trying to break. So let me show you one last measure and then give a little different point of view. If it feels like this is worse than it's ever been, it is. The polarization in Congress. This is, again, using those same kind of scores going all the way back. In recent years, this is measuring the gap between the two parties. If you take the average ideology of Republicans in the House, red line here, average ideology in the Senate, for Republicans versus Democrats, what's the gap between them? I mean, you can find some points around World War II, for instance, where there was little to no gap at all, right? Well, it's grown over time. It really has gotten worse ever since the 1970s, particularly when gerrymandering became more popular. The story so far, it seems pretty neat and clean. Gerrymandering is really a major culprit in all of this. Let me offer you a different argument, though. Why are we seeing polarization extreme and increasing for the Senate also? The Senate does not have redistricting. Your district boundary lines are your state boundary lines. Those don't change election to election. So why, if gerrymandering is to blame, do we see the Senate? Yeah, the Senate isn't quite as bad, but is it really that different? Is it like we don't have a polarization problem in the Senate? No, we still do. Let me show you another way of thinking about this. I did some original data analysis for this presentation, so there you go. I wanted to calculate, could we look at the ideology scores, and I'm just taking this as absolute values. As it happens, all Democrats were to the left, all Republicans were to the right. There was no one crossing over sides here. But if we could look at what's the average kind of, if you will, deviation from moderate, you know, with 100 being most extreme, 0 being moderate, for those folks who are in redistricted House seats, 44. You know, it's a complicated measure, so it doesn't mean they're kind of in the middle of that scale. But anyway, that's where the redistricted folks are. But what about the fact that in the House we also have 7 states, not a lot, 7 states where there's only one member of the House. Therefore, there's no redistricting. Vermont, Montana, Delaware. It's just the state. If it's true that gerrymandering is causing the polarization, we should see a much lower level of extremity for the at-large House members. It is less, but it's not that much less. Or again, what about for the Senate? So what I take away from this, I want to pose some questions to you here in a moment. I wouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. I wouldn't say, you know, if this doesn't solve everything, issue 1, for instance, then it's not a good idea and don't bother with it. But I would be careful not to oversell what the outcome of it might be. I don't think that getting rid of gerrymandering, if you could really truly get rid of it like this actually does, would it make polarization disappear? So let's think of it this way, some questions for you to consider, and I'll wrap up here. First of all, when we talk about what's wrong with Congress, I think the most common targets would be that polarization and the lack of productivity that it leads to. And in a broader sense, just the quality of representation. Are these folks getting in office to really represent the people, or are they being selected to represent certain segments of the population which are very deliberately chosen with political interests in mind? Okay, if that's what's wrong with Congress, is redistricting / gerrymandering the cause of it? Well, I think there's good reason based on what I showed to say, it'd be going too far to say it is the cause. Is it a contributing factor? I think you can make a good case for that. So let's be, you know, careful in the way we talk about it. I think that's probably a more accurate way of thinking of the question, but of course I pose these as questions, so I guess I don't want to answer them too much. But if that's contributing to it, will redistricting reform help to fix what's wrong with Congress? And more specifically, will issue 1 help to fix what's wrong with redistricting? All right, so if you follow the logic of this, you know, plenty of reason to possibly support issue 1 on this basis, but also some more complicated questions to consider. And then, you know, if you do come to the conclusion it's a contributing cause, but it's not the cause, then I'd also ask you as responsible voters to think about what else should we be doing. Things like media environment, campaign financing, plenty of other issues play into this polarization as well. Last thing, this is just a national story in The Atlantic that I saw on what's going on here. And here's a final question that they're posing. Is this an end to gerrymandering? Ohio, you know the saying, as Ohio goes, so goes the nation. In terms of how we vote, there's a really good, I don't know, maybe it's too optimistic, but I'm thinking there's a good possibility here that Ohio could help set a model for the rest of the country. At least we have a proposal that got strong bipartisan support in the in the Ohio legislature. I don't know. If this is a good way of resolving the problem, then perhaps other states will follow suit. And I think that would be something that Ohio could be really proud of, if this is a good solution for it. So let me stop there. I think we have some questions, David, right? Yeah.
And I'm happy to have people write down. If you need additional cards, I do have some.
This is good. Someone was thinking ahead. I always like this in class, right? What are other contributing factors of polarization? So that's just what I was referring to. And frankly, this is my opinion. There may be others I'm not thinking of that you could pitch in on, but I think media environment also incentivizes. It's not just winning the district, but also getting media attention. Also incentivizes going towards the extremes, but money as well. Does someone who says I'm going to go to Washington to really compromise, is that person going to get big checks sent to them as much as someone who said this country's gone wrong, the party's corrupt, I'm going to stand for our true principles and I'm not going to give in? That person's probably going to get more money and media attention, I would say. Is it accurate to say that politicians pick their voters rather than voters pick their politicians? To an extent. Gerrymandering can only go so far. We saw some of those limitations on there, and you can only do so much with where people live. Although actually one thing I didn't mention is there's some really interesting political science research on this in recent years over how people group themselves geographically. People are moving to areas that are more similar to people more similar than themselves. They're not moving to live in a Republican or a Democratic district, but they're moving to a place based on characteristics like socioeconomics and so on that play into how that community votes. And so to some extent, voters are picking their neighbors in a way that kind of plays into this gerrymandering as well. Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. Okay, how much does running during a presidential election affect outcomes of local state politics? Good question. I'm skeptical that it affects a whole lot who people vote for. Are you really going to vote differently because if it's a presidential election year, you want to have some kind of unified ballot, or you're intentionally going to choose a divided one? I think probably not. But it is going to affect who turns out to vote. And certainly in presidential election years in particular, we see younger voters turning out more. That there are other groups too, but that's the one that I think is clearest, that younger voters tend to turn out more during presidential election years and not show up as much during midterms like what we have here. So that's important variation for the presidential versus midterms. Yeah.
Do you have a position on term limits? How that affected?
Good question. So term limits, Dave was asking about that. Maybe this is just my habit to always make things more complicated. Term limits sound really good, but do you know what the average member of the U.S. House and Senate, how many years they serve? 12 years. At least last time I saw this research, I think it was a couple of years ago. All of the most prominent term limit proposals I've seen have been to limit members of the House to 6 terms and members of the Senate to 2 terms, which works out to 12 years. So I think people tend to look a lot at the folks who, the Ted Kennedys and the Robert Byrds and the Strom Thurmonds and so on, who serve for lifetimes, John Dingell. And they tend to focus less on the folks who are fairly in and out. I don't know, Trey Gowdy or someone like that who serves for a relatively short time overall. So, term limits might affect some of that. In fact, we have someone who faced term limits. I'd be interested to know what you think of it. Maybe you can comment on that. I've never had the honor of getting term limited. If there were more encouragement to independent participation, would gerrymandering be affected? I think there's a lot of encouragement for participation, but we have such a partisan environment that it feeds into a lot of this, where people feel like their only choice is between Republicans or Democrats. There are all kinds of structural factors that go into that, and I could get very political science-y on this. Duverger's law is a fun term. Maybe you remember from classes or something. But there are all kinds of reasons for it. The bottom line is, why do we have independents kind of, I don't know if you want to say disenfranchised, but at least pushed to vote for one of the 2 major parties, is because the way our system's set up, with the fact that only one person comes out of a district with the seat, and it requires getting the most votes. If you finish 1 vote behind or 1 million votes behind, same outcome, you get nothing. That just incentivizes people to look for who can gather the most votes and to run away from minor parties or independent candidates. And I do think that's unfortunate. In fact, if you look at countries around the world that have proportional representation voting that represents the party based on the percentage of the vote it gets, they have higher voting rates. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
That's interesting.
Yep.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Let's see. Very few House districts are actually competitive. How does this affect the responsiveness of representatives to voters? Yeah, I think that in itself provides incentive to again do what the people who are going to help you get nominated want, rather than people who live in the district necessarily, or the state or the national electorate at large. Will redistricting reform make districts more competitive? Will this make representatives more responsive to voters? I have to think it will. I mean, I truly do think that issue 1 would help toward this. Again, though, because you have this pattern of people moving to communities that look and feel like me, I think there's only so much that redistricting reform can do. That would take some change in patterns of movement among voters themselves. So it could help, but as I'm trying to get at here, I'd be skeptical of any claim that this is going to solve all problems associated with redistricting. Okay.
We might have time for one more after this.
Okay, one more after this. You got it. This is fun. Can we do this every week? I like this. I hope I'm answering these things well enough. What would be the effects of if issue 1 fails? That's a good question. You said Ohio is the model for the nation, so would that suggest the majority is happy with the status quo? So one thing I point to here, kind of what I was trying to get at, is that we do have actually this issue that's being put on the ballot. It's unanimously in the Senate, I believe, and close to unanimous in the House. I mean, stop and think about that, folks. It's very easy to say that in the state house or in the national Congress, nothing ever gets done that's bipartisan. It's not true. I mean, there is stuff that gets done. It's not probably as frequent as a lot of us would like, but we should also give them credit where credit is due. And this is something that's passed with major support from both parties. Of course, they're not just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. Republicans recognize that they hold a commanding majority right now, but look at 06 to 10, different periods in recent history where Republicans have not been in control. They see that that's a possibility. It doesn't seem real likely right now, but who knows? And so Republicans and Democrats can unite around, we don't know who's going to be in power 4 or 10 years from now. But the fact that they can get something done and propose it to the voters, maybe even get this passed, I think it's likely to pass among Ohio voters. I think that could set a good model for the country. Even if it's just the symbolism of Republicans and Democrats acting together, not everything being a big partisan battle, that could provide some inspiration, at least just a model for the rest of the country that it can happen. As unlikely as it seems in this environment, it can happen, and maybe that will even improve the tenor of Ohio politics. We'll see. That good? Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yep.
And to explain more about issue 1, Tom Roberts.
Give me the map. The map, yeah.
I didn't get it, Tom, but we're
Okay.
going to get it still.
And I can talk while we're doing it. You, the voters, decided when we voted on term limits for the Ohio General Assembly, you voted not to have term limits for members of Congress. So that was on the ballot at the same time. The important thing, one of the important things, I want to reminisce a little bit because everything Jan said is basically true when it comes to Ohio and the Board of Elections. I'm so proud of the system Ohio has. It's been one that's been tested. It's been one that's come through the test. Generally where there's a fall down, and Montgomery County has not been in this area, it's been like Miami County not having enough paper at one time, and some of the machines being kept out in the cold and not being able to function right. And so those in other states, other counties. But by and large, the 88 counties, the Board of Election system, and I'm kind of reform. I'm kind of a, what do you call it, David? A reform politician. You know, can you be a reform politician? Yeah. But what I observed when I was in the House of Representatives, I think this goes to one of the points I want to make about what Chris said, is that when there was a balance in this House of Representatives of the D's and the R's, we talked. We came to the table. There was conversation. And I go up there today and I see that there's no conversation. There's no talk. I can do it, and I'm going to do it. And I think that's what I'm going to tell you when I talk to you about the importance of what was done a few weeks ago in the state capitol is so important. But he pointed out, this is probably Marcia Fudge district you're talking about, right? Going down there. So it's a minority, majority district. But look at this one. The mistake at the lake. We had to lose a Democrat and Republican. And so we, in this area, it was Steve Ostra and Mike Turner in our area. Up here was Marcy Kaptur in Toledo and Dennis the Menace, Dennis Kucinich, over here. And so what do? We put those two together. What does Toledo and Cleveland, other than the lake, have in common? You know? And I could understand this because this was Governor Strickland's district for many years. This is Appalachia, Ohio. And so that made some sense. You know, there's some commonality there. And so the map, Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan. I was, as someone said, I'm now the president of NAACP, so I was visiting some of my folks in Lima. I said, who's your member of Congress? Jim Jordan. So a few weeks later, it was up in Massillon, I think it was. I said, who's your state rep? Who's your member of Congress? Jim Jordan. I said, wait a second. And I looked at this map. Poor Jim Jordan goes all the way across, and I think my numbers tell me something like, let me see what Jim has. Congressman, I said Congressman. I served with him, so he told me I could call him Jim, so I'm going to call him Jim. 103 miles north-south, 135 miles east-west, 14 counties. 14 counties, you know? That's what that district looks like. And, I mean, there are many other examples. I think he's right by and large. But you remember, one time Mike Turner went down to Brown and Clinton County, too. So that was our version of gerrymandering. When did Eldridge Gerry live?
In the early 1800s.
So that's how far this goes back. Right. It was from day one of this country. It was drawn, Eldridge Gerry, and we call it gerrymandering. But it's actually Gary, wasn't it? Eldridge Gerry, and we call it gerrymandering. And so that's what this mess is all about. For me, I think what I observed, and I want to give the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, and the Ohio Conservation District, and then the NAACP and others came later on for their battle they waged. And for those of you who passed the petition, who signed those petitions, I will tell you several things that's very clear to me. One, had you not signed those petitions, the legislature would have never moved on this issue. Yes. That is important. And that is why we have to be vigilant against taking away the citizens' right of initiative. You know, when they don't listen to what's being said, we have to have that initiative. And there's bill after bill eroding that. But I will tell you, had those petitions not been in the wing, and I think they're asking you to continue to circulate them because we want to make sure the leadership of the House and Senate are going to do what they promised us they were going to do. When we were negotiating legislation, they promised to put a full court press. This is basketball season, right? Full court press on this issue because there may be some brothers, you know what I'm talking about? The Koch brothers, who may have an interest in this issue, who may put in dollars to defeat issue 1. We don't know that for sure, but let's say that's a possibility. That's why, yes, it's favorable right now, but very few people know what it's all about. And that's the fear. Those that know about it, 65, 60-some%. But those who know about it is less than 50%. So we have to raise that consciousness. We have to raise that interest. And so for me, issue 1 will do these 3 things. I'm going to go back to my notes so I can get it right. I don't have a beautiful slide like Chris. I'm done. And again, this was all negotiated by those groups who were at the table. I remember one meeting, we were in the speaker's office and talking about it, and the league was there out front, and Environmental Council was there, and Common Cause, and NAACP, and a couple of other labor groups. And the speaker was interested in hearing what we had to say. Now that's rare. That's rare. I think the slide that he had before was the press conference we did that morning. And then we got a message like at noon, the speaker wants to meet with you. So we went over and met with him. And then the leadership of both House and Senate. So this is like a 2-week back and forth, telephone calls 24/7, you know, to make sure. And the issue for me and for what they were saying is no district should be favorable or disfavorable to either political party. And that's the conversation. You know, we both know that under the Democrats, it was drawn the best way to support Democrats. Under the Republicans, it was drawn the best to support Republicans. But we all know that it's all of that distrust in Washington is what's causing this. I'm hoping, in my answer to part of your question, I'm hoping if we get enough reasonable-minded people in Congress, they will do as we did under Speaker Rife, go across the aisle and have conversations. Under Dick Fine and Stanley Aronoff in the Senate, go across the aisle and have conversations. Right now, there's no need because it's my way or the highway. And that's what's so powerful about what went on a few weeks ago. They walked in with those petitions saying we have 200, well, I don't know what the number was, 230,000 signatures. Now, negotiate with us, and we're going to take it to the ballot. Why did the legislature push Senate Joint Resolution 5? Because they were ready to file the petitions. And they went ahead and put it on the May ballot to take away from the petitioners taking it to the ballot. But you know what? That's still out there. So we can still file it and go in November, okay? So here's what it did. Number 1, the first stage, and we call them silos, but I think we're going to talk about stages. And stage 1 requires a 3/5 vote of both the House and the Senate and must include 50% support of minority party. That's the first phase. If that doesn't work, stage 2, remember that redistricting commission that we voted on? It goes to the redistricting commission, and they will be empowered to draw the districts and approve a map with at least 2 minority party members. So the commission, 2 of the members of the minority have to support it. If that fails, stage 3, the legislature gets another chance to to pass it. 1, with a 10-year map, with 1/3 minority parties supporting, or 2, a 4-year map with a simple majority. Throughout the process, you can submit a map. You can submit a map. This process won't allow this to happen. This mistake at the lake, it won't allow that to happen. It will not allow that to happen. So that's the thing that, and so it has those 3 phases, and I'm sure the league and others will be putting out, you know, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, so you understand it. But for my understanding and those who looked at it, this is just the process. They still have to do it. And so that's why we still have to hold their feet to the fire. Was it 2021 when they do it, to say, remember, remember the saying about the flood? Remember what was that saying? Remember the deal we made in the attic or something? Yeah. You know, so we have to remind the legislators, remember the deal you made in your vote on Senate Joint Resolution 5. We have to remind them, this is phase 1. We have to support it. But then when it comes time to redraw those districts, we have to still be at the table to make sure, and by many of the rules it says they won't do this, but we have to make sure they stick to it. They stick to what's being asked of them. I'm excited about it because I've always, as some of you know, served in the legislature, but I've always been interested in the empowerment of people. And this showed me the power the citizens really have, you know, in the petition and the initiative drive, and the fact that this legislature, there's so many issues that Sue and I work on. We have a group called the Voter Protection Task Force that Jan is aware of, you know, but we take a look at what happened at the last election. In between League of Women Voters, NAACP, and ABLE, advocates for basic legal education, the legal aid, we challenge, you know, the boards in the 3 counties on what we observed, what we heard, and what we want them to do differently. And so we have that Voter Protection Task Force going on, and we're going to need to kick back in and get ready for it. But I remember a few years ago, Ellis Jacobs and I went over to Greene County because the students, I think it was either Central State or Wilberforce, were not allowed to vote. And the whole question of where they live, right, it becomes an issue. Do you declare yourself living in the dorm, or do you declare yourself living in Detroit, where you're from? And so the Board of Election over there worked with Central State to come up with, I think it was a piece of paper, basically that the students now take with them to vote. That says, I am a student, a registered student at Central State University, and they haven't been disenfranchised ever since. And so those are kind of things that the League and NAACP and ABLE have been working on voter protection. But this was powerful. And I thank you who helped sign the petition. I thank you who are going to continue to work on this issue to make sure the legislature does it. But I would need for you to go out and tell people to vote yes on issue 1. Vote on issue 1. Okay? And I'll be glad to. I don't have to rebut anything else you said, Chris, but yeah, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Does anybody need cards? I'm happy to take more questions. Tom?
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make sure that there's an order to it. So let's do this one and then that one.
Okay. So what is the most effective way to publicize issue 1 and educate the voters? Take what you learned here, you know, and the damage that gerrymandering is doing to public policy across the nation. You know, that's why the D's and R's don't have to talk. The second thing is to exercise our right to vote, you know, and tell people how important issue 1 is to the democracy. You know, that's what we have to look at, what this country is all about, the democracy is all about. So I think we have to do that. Was this your question?
It is. I want to follow up. Take it where? The question is not, most of the people in this room have a keen sense
Right.
of what's at stake.
Okay.
What is the most effective way? Where is the most effective place to get this information?
Wherever you have most influence. Yeah. So the question is, what is the most effective way to publicize issue 1 and educate the voters? And so where you have the most influence, some people may do it in the church. You know, some people may do it in your club. Some people may do it wherever you can give a voice. I don't know if there's any literature out, but once the literature's out, make sure you get that out. I think part of it is going to be your conversation based on what you heard tonight. The most important pieces of voting for this issue, because look at what we have. Look at the polarization we have, you know, of the issue right now. So
You have to sell me on it.
I understand.
I've been circulating petitions.
Yeah.
I want to know how to make sure that a ballot initiative that has gone on a May primary where people don't necessarily vote
Yeah.
will pass so that people will not have to continue to circulate those petitions. And we only have until July then.
May, yeah.
Please do read it because the
Okay.
TV can't hear people's comments.
Okay. Did we answer it all now for you? We'll talk offline then. I don't know this answer, and maybe the question is if Ohio loses one seat after the next census, who decides which party loses the seat?
It would be up to the legislative, the redistricting process. So currently, it would be up to the majority in the legislature, with subject to the governor's signing.
Okay. Yeah, and so the answer is it will be up to the legislature to make that decision, which party loses the seat. I think the last time they agreed we would lose one D and one R, and that's why Austria, Representative Austria and Representative Turner were in this area, and the two representatives up north. So I think the last time the parties agreed on that. I think I have one more, David. Okay. So was there any consideration given to removing the political parties from redistricting process? Yes, but the politicians didn't want to hear it. You know, and so, and that's the answer to me. The politicians did not want to be removed from the process. And so the group had to negotiate from their strengths. And one of the languages I think that kept coming up is shouldn't favor or disfavor either political party. And that was the line that your petition said, and that was the line that was carried through in the legislature. So, yes, the politicians didn't want to change it. You know?
Put them in order that I think makes sense.
Okay. I have the language somewhere, but I don't have it with me tonight. It's posted. So the question is, how would the wording be on the ballot? Is it a yes vote or support? Yeah, and I think it will be a yes or no vote. Yes, and you're absolutely right. So often the ballot board writes the language, so it is confusing, and so that's why we have to continue to educate. Okay.
Add to that, right? Since I've been at the board, the ballot language is no longer confusing as far as for the issue or
Against the issue. It used to be kind of double speak. You're looking at me like that as an
We will agree to disagree. Yeah. Because I think we just recently had something with John Husted that we thought the ballot board screwed it up and they made the language impossible to read. And so we will
Respectfully disagree.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. But that's the conversation we have, you know?
We can have that later.
Yeah. But
it's
I don't
better-
remember exactly
It's
what.
better than it was. So you don't have to read, double speak as much as you used to have. Just
Yeah.
read. Let me put it that way, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Will there be a provision to keep a single county in a single district, minimize split counties? Some split counties will happen, but it will be very minimal, very minimal. And one example, I think, is Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who we all know. Columbus is so large, her district's going to go out of Franklin County. You don't go to other counties. So it's the number 550 something like that, 530. And so the point is, just like the legislature, there has to be so many population-wise per district. Well, her district is so large that she's going to go out of Franklin County, so it's going to be impossible to keep her intact. But the goal from the group would be to keep districts intact. And there's some significance, to which I said, to the Appalachian community. That made sense to some degree. There is a map that you can square everything off and make it look nice. But I think to keep counties intact is much impossible. Do you remember? I think it was Huber Heights at one time had both John Boehner and Mike Turner at one time. Huber Heights. Mike Turner and John Boehner made no sense whatsoever, So hopefully the goal from those who are pushing issue 1 is to have fair districts, to have districts where your choice is just as much important in November as it is in the primary, because that's exactly right what Chris is saying. Most voters have to vote in the May primary, if they want, and so I have to switch over. Ryan McGlynn had a bill one time. It was the dumbest bill I ever heard, but now it makes more sense. None of the above. And that's where I would probably disagree with the purging that's before the U.S. Supreme Court. once you're registered to vote, I don't think anybody should take you off the roll. You should have a choice to vote for none of the above. Now, until we put it on the ballot, I think you ought to be able to show up or not. But until that's changed, we have to remind people that if you don't vote in 2 consecutive federal elections, there's some power that will take you off the rolls. And that's what's before the Supreme Court right now. My friends from APRI and the League, where the League's part of that, who sued and so it's before the U.S. Supreme Court right now. Hopefully it'll decide here, but not before this election.
Dan's going to clear up some questions about the petitions.
Okay.
The position of the Fair Districts Equal Fair Elections Coalition is that we are still collecting signatures on our petitions. But because we're not an army of volunteers, although we're close to an army, we are trying to focus right now on getting issue 1 passed. There are still volunteers who are collecting signatures, but our primary focus now is getting issue 1 passed, getting the signatures that we've already collected validated, and being ready to jump if this would fail in May 8th. Now, if we would find in the middle of April that there's a lot of money behind a no vote, that might change, and we might just go straight back to collecting signatures like crazy. But right now, with the amount of money and volunteers, personnel that we have, we're trying to focus on passing issue 1.
Thank you.
And
David.
yes, we do need volunteers. We need volunteers to get
think so.
issue
Let me
1
just check
passed,
to make sure.
and we need volunteers to get the signatures validated on the petitions that we already have in hand.
That one.
Maybe you answered it.
Okay. Have state leaders begun to promote issue 1? Can it pass without a coordinated campaign? It has a coordinated, bipartisan, is probably the other way to put it. But as I said, it's my understanding that it's still under the radar for a lot of voters. And so we have to do the educational piece so people know the importance of it. And I have not seen any literature yet, but they're working on it. They just completed a poll that tells us what needs to be done. And so from there, I think they're going to work on whatever literature that needs to be done. But yes, there is an educational piece. And the other thing is, like, I'm doing this tonight. There was a group last night. There's a group in Akron. There's a group in Cleveland. And so all over the state, they're having these kind of gatherings, sponsored primarily by the League and other groups, pulling them off. So the educational piece is going on around the state. There's just no printed material being passed out. But as was pointed out by Jan, the fear is that if the last minute somebody with big money comes into the state and puts it against the issue, we're going to be in trouble. And so that's why we've got to do the grassroots work. I mean, that's what made this such a powerful, powerful movement. I don't know, Jan, it says, how can people donate to this effort? Is there a...
So if you wanted to know,
Yes.
donate to the League of Women Voters. The Fair Districts Equal Fair Elections has a website, the Fair Districts Ohio, and you can go there. They have a button, how do I donate? You go and directly donate on the internet, but you can also write a check to the League of Women Voters or Common Cause, and write on the memo field for Fair Districts, and we'll make sure it goes to the right campaign.
Okay. I'm not in that loop.
Are there other questions? If I could get your card, it just helps to hear, right, if we can read the question. Looks like there's some handouts coming. Oh, there's the question.
Well, will technology be used to draw districts based on new laws? I don't know. We're focusing in on the process, and that will come in 10 years or a few years, how, but we're focusing on the process that we want the legislature to use to draw the districts. Technology could be used, but I don't know the answer to that right now.
There's now, program software that.
Yeah, well, the league did it, 2 years ago when they drew that beautiful map that was a fair and balanced district. It was done by a computer, right? And so I mean, the technology is there. Whether the legislature will use that or use their own numbers crunchers, there's always some young guys out here who know all about these numbers and can fix it, So we have to make sure. And the answer is, I don't know the answer, so I wouldn't guess to even give you an answer to that. Okay.
Are there any other questions? We want to
Thank you all.
Also, if any of you know anyone that needs a voter registration form, we have them outside. If you need to update your voter registration, that's available. If you've got a young person who is going to be 18 by the next election, they can vote in the primary on issues when they're 17. So we have information out there for that as well. I will tell you, obviously, the League of Women Voters does support Issue 1. We have been working on this issue for 40+ years. So, and I have to say, I do get to work with a great deal of politicians, and it's truly one of the nicest parts of my job. I do believe if we took redistricting out of it, if we had fair districts, the politicians that I know on both sides just want to do their job. But when it's redistrict, you have to kind of play the game, and they'll admit it. If you want to be on a committee, if you want your legislation to pass, you've got to play the game. So if we can get the districts right, I think the politicians want to do a good job, and I think they will. So vote yes on Issue 1.